A billionaire's empire crumbled the moment a maid's 2-year-old daughter dared to speak. Harrison Blackwood, billionaire and self-proclaimed king of Chicago's skyline, smiled as his Japanese guest prepared to sign the contract that would cement his empire. The polished penthouse radiated power, glass walls, Italian rugs, art worth millions. No one noticed the maid's daughter standing quietly in the corner, a faded backpack clutched to her chest. At 12, Abigail Riley was invisible here, just another shadow in her mother's world of silent servitude. But when her eyes fell on the Japanese page of that contract, her blood ran cold. She stepped forward, her voice trembling, but clear. That's not what it says. And in that single moment, the room froze. A $500 million empire teetering on the edge of ruin. Just before we dive in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from today. We love seeing how far these stories reach. And make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss tomorrow's special video. Now, let's jump back in. Enjoy the story. A single piece of paper could ruin them all. And only the maid's daughter knew it. 2-year-old Abigail clutched the worn strap of her backpack. The frayed canvas a stark contrast to the polished marble floor beneath her feet. The elevator ascended with a silent, unnerving speed, and with each floor, the city of Chicago shrank into a glittering map below. The doors slid open without a sound, revealing the penthouse apartment of Harrison Blackwood. It wasn't a home, it was a statement. Glass walls stretched from floor to ceiling, holding the sky captive. Furniture that looked more like art than something you could sit on was arranged with cold precision. The air itself felt different, thin and smelling of expensive leather and something floral that Abby couldn't name. It was the smell of money. She supposed a smell that made her own worn-out jeans and faded t-shirt feel like a costume from another world. Her mother, Helen, stood beside her, her shoulders already tight with attention that Abby knew well. Helen was a good maid, the best. She was quiet, efficient, and invisible. 3 qualities her employers prized above all others. Today was her day off, a precious Sunday she usually spent with Abby, but Mr. Blackwood had called in a panic, a last-minute career-defining meeting with Japanese investors. The regular staff was unavailable, and the agency, knowing Helen's desperation, had offered a bonus she couldn't refuse. A bonus that would barely make a dent in the mountain of debt that had shadowed their lives since Abby's father passed away 2 years ago. "Abby, remember what we talked about?" Helen whispered, her voice barely a breath. "Stay in the kitchen unless I ask you for help. Don't touch anything. And please, please do not speak to anyone unless they speak to you first." Abby nodded, her blonde hair falling into her eyes. She tucked the strands behind her ear, her gaze sweeping across the vast living room. It was like a museum, a place where you looked but never touched. In her backpack, nestled between a water bottle and a half-eaten apple, was a small dog-eared paperback. It was a collection of Japanese folktales, a language her grandfather had insisted she learn. He said it was a key, a way to understand a world built on honor and respect, things he felt were fading from their own. The book was her only comfort in places like this, a secret world she could escape into. The click of expensive shoes on marble announced their arrival. Eleanor Blackwood, Harrison's wife, glided towards them. She was a woman sculpted from ice, her blonde hair coifted into a perfect, unmoving helmet. Her smile didn't reach her eyes, which scanned Helen and then Abby with a flicker of undisguised annoyance. "Helen, you're late," she said, her voice crisp. The clock on the wall read 1:58 p.m. They had been told to arrive at 2 p.m. "My apologies, Mrs. Blackwood." The bus was running behind schedule. Eleanor waved a dismissive hand, a cascade of diamond bracelets rattling on her wrist. "Excuses. The investors will be here any moment. This is a $500 million deal. Everything must be perfect. Is this your daughter?" Her eyes landed on Abby, and her lip curled slightly. "I wasn't aware you'd be bringing a child. The agency said it would be all right for just a few hours. She'll be no trouble at all. I promise. She's very quiet." "See that she is," Eleanor said, turning her back on them. "The caterers have set up the appetizers. You will be in charge of serving drinks. Do not let a glass get empty. Do not spill anything. Do not exist. Is that clear?" "Yes, Mrs. Blackwood, Helen said, her voice tight. She led Abby toward the sprawling stainless steel kitchen, a room bigger than their entire apartment. As they passed the dining area, a young man lounged on a sleek leather sofa, scrolling through his phone. This was Preston Blackwood, their son. He was about 20 with his father's sharp features and his mother's cold eyes. He glanced up, his gaze lingering on Abby with a smirk. "Mom, you hired a babysitter, too?" He called out, his voice dripping with condescension. "What's in the bag, kid?" "Crayons." Abby's cheeks flushed. She clutched her backpack tighter and followed her mother into the kitchen, the sound of his soft chuckle following them like a shadow. In the kitchen, Helen took a deep breath, her back to Abby. "Just ignore them," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "We do our work, we get paid, and we go home. That's all that matters." She handed Abby a small tray of polished glasses. "You can help me carry these out. Just put them on the side table and come right back." Abby did as she was told, her movements small and careful. The living room was beginning to fill up. Harrison Blackwood had emerged from his study. He was a bull of a man, his expensive suit stretched tight across his broad shoulders. He exuded an aura of aggressive confidence, a man who didn't ask for things, but took them. He was pacing, barking orders into his phone, his voice a low growl that made the hair on Abby's arm stand up. The doorbell chimed, a soft, melodic sound that seemed to make the entire apartment hold its breath. Harrison snapped his phone shut, plastered a wide, artificial smile on his face, and strode towards the entrance. "Mr. Tanaka, welcome, welcome," he boomed. An older Japanese gentleman entered, followed by two younger aides and an American interpreter. Mr. Kenji Tanaka was small and impeccably dressed in a conservative dark suit. He moved with a quiet dignity that was a world away from Harrison Blackwood's blustering energy. He bowed slightly, his expression serene and unreadable. The introductions were a flurry of names and handshakes. Abby watched from the corner, a ghost in the background. Her mother was already moving through the room with a tray of champagne flutes, her face a perfect mask of polite indifference. The conversation began, filtered through the two interpreters. It was a stilted, awkward dance of words. Mr. Blackwood spoke of profits and market domination, his words loud and confident. Mr. Tanaka spoke of partnership, legacy, and trust, his voice soft and measured. Preston joined his father, trying to look important. He clapped one of Mr. Tanaka's aides on the back a little too hard, making the man flinch. "So, you guys excited to make some real money with us?" Preston asked loudly, as if speaking to children. The interpreter winced as he translated. Eleanor floated through the room, pointing out the expensive art on the walls. "This is a Rothko," she announced to one of the Japanese delegates. "It's worth more than your car. Probably your house, too." The man simply bowed his head, his face impassive. Abby felt a knot of anger tighten in her stomach. These people were rude. They were bullies. They mistook politeness for weakness. She thought of her grandfather. He had fought in the Pacific during the war. He'd seen terrible things, but he never spoke of the Japanese people with anything but respect. "They have a word, Abby," he used to tell her, his voice raspy with age. "Giri. It means duty, honor. A person's word is a sacred bond. Never forget that." She saw her mom approach a group of Harrison's associates. One of them, a man with a shiny gold watch, didn't even look at her as he took a glass. He turned to his friend and muttered just loud enough for Abby to hear over the low hum of conversation. "Can you believe the agency sent someone like her? Look at her shoes. They've seen better days." His friend snickered. "Probably the best $5 she's ever spent." Helen heard them. Abby saw her jaw clench for a fraction of a second. A tiny, almost imperceptible tremor, but then it was gone. Her expression smoothed over, and she moved on to the next guest. Her tray held perfectly steady, Abby's heart HD for her. Her mother worked so hard, harder than anyone she knew. Yet, these people saw nothing but a pair of worn-out shoes. The meeting dragged on. The investors were polite, but non-committal. Harrison Blackwood was getting visibly impatient. His smile was becoming strained, his movements jerky. He kept glancing at the large leather-bound document on the coffee table. The contract. Gentlemen, Harrison finally said, his voice a little too loud. I think we've talked enough. The numbers speak for themselves. This deal will be the most profitable venture your company has ever undertaken. Shall we sign and celebrate? He gestured for Helen to refill the glasses. As her mother moved to obey, Preston stepped deliberately into her path, causing her to stumble. A few drops of champagne sloshed onto the pristine white rug. Watch it, Preston snapped, glaring at her. This rug is Italian silk. It costs more than you make in a year. Helen's face went pale. I am so sorry, Mr. Blackwood. It was an accident. A clumsy one, Eleanor added from across the room, her voice like cracking ice. Perhaps you should watch where you're going. Abby felt her hands curl into fists at her sides. It wasn't an accident. He had done it on purpose. She saw the smirk flicker across Preston's face before he turned away. Her mother knelt, dabbing at the small stain with a napkin, her face hidden, but Abby could imagine the shame burning in her cheeks. Mr. Tanaka watched the exchange, his dark eyes missing nothing. His serene expression didn't change, but Abby noticed him place his champagne flute down on a table untouched. Harrison ignored the incident, focusing all his attention on the contract. My interpreter has reviewed the Japanese translation, he announced, gesturing to the nervous-looking man standing by his side. It is a perfect mirror of the English. A formality, really. He slid the document across the low glass table toward Mr. Tanaka. It was open to the last page, a line waiting for a signature above Mr. Tanaka's neatly typed name. The document was thick, one side printed in English, the facing page in Japanese characters. Abby was meant to be in the kitchen, out of sight. But her mother had sent her to collect the empty glasses, and she was standing near the coffee table, her small tray in hand. Her eyes, against her will, fell upon the page. She wasn't trying to read it. It was just a glance, but the characters were as familiar to her as the letters of her own name. Her grandfather had spent years drilling them into her head. First with flashcards, in his dusty study, then with the books he gave her every birthday and Christmas. Her gaze scanned a short paragraph near the bottom of the page. The English side was dense with legal terminology she didn't understand, but the Japanese was different. The characters formed words, and the words formed a sentence that made her blood run cold. Her breath hitched. Her mother finished with the spill, noticed her standing frozen. She shot Abby a panicked look, a silent plea to move, to disappear back into the kitchen, but Abby couldn't move. Her eyes were glued to the page. Preston saw her staring. A cruel, amused grin spread across his face. "What's the matter, little maid?" he said, his voice loud enough to draw the attention of the entire room. "Trying to read the grown-up papers. I don't think they have picture books in there for you." The other guests chuckled. Harrison Blackwood shot her a look of pure fury. "Helen, get your child out of here now." Helen rushed to Abby's side, grabbing her arm. "Abby, let's go," she urged in a desperate whisper. But Mr. Tanaka had picked up the pen. It was a beautiful fountain pen, gold and gleaming under the recessed lights. He uncapped it. The tip hovered over the signature line, a single point of ink that would seal the $500 million deal. Abby's grandfather's voice echoed in her mind. "Honor, Abby. A person's word is a sacred bond." This wasn't a bond. It was a trap. The pen touched the paper. "That's not what it says," Abby said. The words were quiet, barely a whisper, but in the tense silence of the room, they landed like a thunderclap. Every head turned toward her. Harrison Blackwood's face went from red to a blotchy purple. His wife looked as if she'd just swallowed poison. Preston's mocking smile froze on his lips. Her own mother looked at her with wide, terrified eyes, her hand tightening on Abby's arm like a vice. The pen in Mr. Tanaka's hand stilled, a hair's breadth from the paper. He slowly lifted his head, his dark, intelligent eyes fixing on the small blonde girl in the faded t-shirt. The room held its breath, the silence stretching into an eternity thick with disbelief and outrage. Harrison Blackwood was the first to recover, his voice a low, dangerous roar. "What did you just say?" He took a step toward her, his large frame radiating menace. "You are a maid's daughter. You will be silent, or I will have you and your mother thrown out onto the street. Do you understand me?" Helen tugged harder on Abby's arm. Mr. Blackwood, I am so sorry. She, she doesn't know what she's saying. She's just a child. Her voice was shaking so badly she could barely get the words out. We'll go. We'll leave right now. You're darn right you'll leave. Eleanor hissed, her face a mask of fury. And you can forget about getting paid. The audacity. But Mr. Tanaka held up a hand, a small simple gesture, but it had the immediate effect of silencing the room. All eyes turned to him. He hadn't looked away from Abby. He ignored Harrison's outburst completely, his gaze calm and focused. He said something in Japanese, his tone gentle, questioning. The Blackwood's interpreter, a pale, sweaty man named Clark, quickly translated. Mr. Tanaka asks, "What did you say, little girl?" Before Abby could answer, Preston scoffed loudly. Oh, come on. Are we really going to listen to this? She's a 1-2-year-old kid. She probably can't even spell contract, let alone read one. She's just trying to get attention. One of the associates chimed in, eager to get back on Harrison's good side. Let's just sign the papers and get on with it. Mr. Tanaka ignored them all. He repeated his question in Japanese, his eyes still locked on Abby. Abby took a shaky breath. She looked at her mother's terrified face, at Harrison Blackwood's threatening glare, at the circle of sneering, dismissive adults. Every instinct told her to run, to hide, to do what her mother had always told her to do, be invisible. But then she thought of her grandfather sitting in his worn armchair, the scent of old books and peppermint tea filling the air. Truth is a heavy thing to carry, Abby girl, he'd once said. But it's not as heavy as regret. She pulled her arm gently from her mother's grasp. She looked directly at Mr. Tanaka and answered him in the same language. Her Japanese was flawless, her pronunciation perfect, the formal, respectful tones flowing from her as if she had spoken it her entire life. Mash awake Gomison, she began, her voice clear and steady despite the frantic beating of her heart. I apologize for the interruption. The effect was instantaneous and profound. The room, which had been simmering with irritation, was plunged into a state of shocked, absolute silence. Clark, the interpreter, looked as though he had been struck by lightning. His mouth hung open, his eyes wide with disbelief. Harrison Blackwood stared, his face a comical picture of confusion and rage. Eleanor's manicured hand flew to her pearls, her icy composure finally cracking. Preston just gaped at her, his earlier smirk wiped clean from his face. Mr. Tanaka's eyebrows rose slightly. It was the first real change in his expression Abby had seen all day. A flicker of something. Intrigue, surprise, respect danced in his dark eyes. He leaned forward, ignoring everyone else in the room. He spoke to her again in Japanese, a longer, more complex sentence this time. You speak my language very well. Who was your teacher? Abby replied, still in Japanese. My grandfather taught me. He said it was important to understand the heart of a people, not just their words. The exchange, lasting only a few seconds, completely altered the power dynamic in the room. The Blackwoods and their associates were now on the outside, confused and irrelevant. The real conversation was happening between a Japanese billionaire and a 1-2-year-old girl in a faded t-shirt. Harrison finally found his voice sputtering. What? What is she saying? Clark, what is going on? The interpreter licked his dry lips, his eyes darting nervously between Mr. Tanaka and Harrison. She's speaking Japanese. Mr. Blackwood fluently. I can see that, Harrison roared, his face turning a dangerous shade of red. What is she saying to him? Before Clark could translate, Mr. Tanaka turned his calm gaze back to Abby. He gestured to the open contract on the table. Kuranis, he asked, what does this mean? He pointed to the document. Anata, you said that is not what it says. He held her gaze. Naniga should go no duka. What is different? All the mockery, all the condescension had vanished. He was speaking to her not as a child, not as a maid's daughter, but as an equal. He was asking for the truth. Abby stepped forward, her fear replaced by a quiet resolve. Her small finger, unadorned and clean, pointed to a specific clause on the Japanese side of the page. The corresponding paragraph in English was filled with vague corporate language about market fluctuations and asset protection protocols. It was designed to be confusing, to be skimmed over, but the Japanese text was brutally clear. She took a deep breath and began to read the Japanese clause aloud. Her voice didn't waver. The ancient, elegant syllables filled the silent room. When she finished the paragraph, she looked up and translated it for the benefit of the stunned English speakers. "It says," she said, her voice ringing with a clarity that defied her age, "that in the event of any regional market down earned greater than 5%, even if unrelated to this venture, all of Tanaka's subsidiary assets will be held as collateral and transferred to Blackwood Global's complete administrative control." She paused, letting the words sink in. The English version just says the parties will reevaluate their positions. The Japanese version says he will take his companies. She looked from the paper to Harrison Blackwood, her blue eyes clear and direct. "It's a trap. It's a $500 million scam." The silence that followed Abby's words was heavier than stone. It was a silence filled with the shrapnel of Harrison Blackwood's shattered confidence and the cold dawning light of understanding in the eyes of the Japanese delegation. Every bit of air seemed to have been sucked out of the penthouse. Then the dam of Harrison's composure burst. "Lies," he bellowed, his voice cracking with rage. He jabbed a thick finger in Abby's direction, his face contorted into a grotesque mask of fury. "She's lying. It's a ridiculous, absurd lie from a child who wants attention." He turned his frantic gaze on Mr. Tanaka. "Kenji, you can't possibly believe this nonsense. She's a nobody. Her mother cleans my floors. What would she know about a multi-million-dollar contract?" He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound that echoed off the glass walls. "It's a mistake, a child's fantasy." Mr. Tanaka did not look at Harrison. He didn't even seem to hear him. His eyes remained on Abby, a profound searching look that seemed to peel back the layers of her worn-out clothes and see something deep inside. He then shifted his gaze slowly and deliberately to the interpreter, Clark. The air around the pale, sweating man seemed to drop 20 degrees. Mr. Tanaka spoke to him in Japanese. The tone wasn't loud, but it was as sharp and cold as a surgeon's scalpel. It was a command, not a question. Clark visibly flinched. He stammered, trying to form a response in Japanese, but the words caught in his throat. He looked at Harrison Blackwood, his eyes wide with panic, silently pleading for help, but Harrison was too consumed by his own rage to offer any. "Mr. Tanaka spoke again, just 2 words this time, in a voice that was barely a whisper, but carried the weight of an executioner's sentence. Clark crumbled, his shoulders slumped, and he looked at the floor as if it were a vast, empty chasm, ready to swallow him whole. He switched to English, his voice a pathetic whimper. Mr. Blackwood, he paid me an extra $20,000. He wrung his hands, sweat beading on his forehead and trickling down his temples. He said it was a minor translation adjustment to protect his interests. He told me the Japanese side wouldn't read it that closely, that they trusted the English version. I have a family. I needed the money." The confession hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. It was the sound of a nail being hammered into Harrison Blackwood's corporate coffin. Harrison looked as if he'd been physically struck. The blood drained from his face, leaving it a pasty-mottled gray. "You sniveling idiot," he shrieked at Clark, his voice rising to a hysterical pitch. "I'll ruin you. You'll never work as an interpreter again. You'll be cleaning toilets." He then spun on Helen, who stood frozen beside her daughter, her face a canvas of pure terror. "And you," he snarled, advancing on her. "You are fired. Get out of my house. You bring this lying little witch into my home to sabotage the biggest deal of my life. I'll make sure you are blacklisted. You won't find a job scrubbing floors in a back alley in this city when I'm through with you." His face was inches from Helen's. Spittle flew from his lips as he yelled. Abby instinctively stepped in front of her mother, a small, defiant shield against the storm of his fury. "Don't you talk to my mother like that," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "You insolent brat," Harrison roared, raising his hand. For a terrifying second, Abby thought he was going to strike her. But before his hand could move any further, one of Mr. Tanaka's aides, a man who had been silent the entire time, moved with startling speed. He was not a large man, but he stepped between Harrison and Abby, placing a firm, restraining hand on Harrison's chest. He said nothing. He just stared at Harrison with cold, disapproving eyes. The message was clear. You will go no further. Harrison stumbled back, his rage momentarily checked by the unexpected intervention. He looked around the room at the horrified faces of his associates, the disgusted expressions of the Japanese delegation, and the utter contempt in Mr. Tanaka's eyes. He saw his world, his carefully constructed empire of bluster and intimidation, crumbling to dust around him. The chaos subsided as quickly as it had erupted. Mr. Tanaka waved his aide back to his side with a subtle gesture. The penthouse fell silent once more, the only sound, the distant, indifferent hum of the city below. Mr. Tanaka's attention returned to Abby. The hardness in his eyes melted away, replaced by a gentle curiosity and a deep soul-stirring respect. He took a step closer, creating a small, intimate space around them as if the rest of the room and its ugly drama no longer existed. He spoke to her in English now, his voice soft and kind. You showed great courage, little one. Your mother should be very proud. He glanced at Helen, offering her a small, reassuring bow. Helen, still trembling, could only stare back, her mind struggling to catch up with the impossible reality of the situation. You said your grandfather taught you Japanese. Mr. Tanaka continued, his focus entirely on Abby, and he taught you about honor. He must have been a very wise man. May I ask his name? Walter, Abby said quietly. His name was Walter Riley. A flicker of recognition crossed Mr. Tanaka's face. It was faint, but it was there. Riley. He repeated the name, tasting the sound of it. Did he ever speak of his time in the war, where he served? All the time, Abby said, a small sad smile touching her lips as she thought of her grandfather who had passed away just last year. He was with the 77th Infantry Division. He fought on Okinawa. The air crackled. The name of that bloody, brutal island hung between them. Mr. Tanaka's serene composure finally broke. His eyes widened and he took a sharp, audible breath. His aides exchanged a look of sudden profound understanding. Eleanor Blackwood, seeing the conversation had taken a bizarre personal turn, tried to seize the opportunity to salvage the situation. What does any of this have to do with anything? She snapped, her voice shrill. An old war story isn't going to change the fact that this child has ruined us. Mr. Tanaka didn't even grant her a glance. It was as if she had ceased to exist. His world had shrunk to this one small girl and the ghost of her grandfather. My grandfather, Mr. Tanaka said, his voice thick with an emotion that stunned the room, was Satu Tanaka. He was not a soldier by choice. He was a student of poetry, conscripted into the Imperial Army at 18. He too was on Okinawa. He paused, his dark eyes glistening with unshed tears. He rarely spoke of the war. It was a place of ghosts for him. But there was one story he told over and over again to his son and to his grandson. It was the story of how he lived when so many others did not. The room was utterly still. Even Harrison Blackwood seemed to have been shocked into silence, his face a slack-jawed picture of disbelief. My grandfather was wounded during an artillery barrage. Mr. Tanaka continued, his voice low and reverent. He was alone, separated from his unit. He thought he was going to die. An American soldier found him, a GI. Instead of finishing him, the American dragged him into a shelled-out farmhouse for cover. He cleaned my grandfather's wound with water from his own canteen and gave him a piece of a chocolate bar. He looked directly into Abby's blue eyes, as if searching for her grandfather's soul within them. They couldn't speak each other's language, but they stayed there for a whole day while the battle raged outside. That American soldier saved my grandfather's life. He treated him not as an enemy, but as a fellow human being. My grandfather never forgot his face. He never forgot his kindness. He only knew the last name on the soldier's helmet, Mr. Tanaka's hand went to the inside pocket of his suit jacket. With trembling fingers, he pulled out a worn, dark brown leather wallet. It was old. The corners softened with age. From a hidden flap, he carefully extracted a small black and white photograph, its edges creased and yellowed. He held it out for Abby to see. The picture showed two young men, barely out of their teens, sitting on a pile of rubble. They were both in dirty, tattered uniforms from opposing armies. One was Japanese, his face thin and weary, but with a hint of a grateful smile. The other was an American soldier, his face smudged with dirt, a pair of clear, kind eyes looking directly at the camera. Though decades younger, his jawline still forming, his hair short and military style. The face was unmistakable. It was her grandpa. It was Walter Riley. Abby's hand flew to her mouth, a soft gasp escaping her lips. Tears welled in her eyes, blurring the image of the young man who had told her bedtime stories and taught her that honor was the only thing a person truly owned. My grandfather carried this picture every day of his life, Mr. Tanaka said, his voice choked with emotion. It was his most prized possession, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, humanity and honor can prevail. He told me, Kingji, if you ever meet an American named Riley, you treat him as family. Our family owes us a debt that can never truly be repaid. He looked from the photograph in his hand to Harrison Blackwood, and his expression transformed. The warmth and emotion vanished, replaced by a glacial fury that was far more terrifying than Harrison's loud, blustering rage. You, Mr. Tanaka said, his voice lethally soft, tried to swindle me, but you did not just try to steal my money. You stood in the presence of this girl, the granddaughter of the man to whom my family owes its very existence, and you allowed your family to mock her. You threatened her. You tried to humiliate her and her mother. He carefully placed the photograph back in his wallet and returned it to his pocket as if shielding it from the profane presence of the man before him. The deal is off, Mr. Blackwood, he said, the words falling like chips of ice. But this is no longer about business. This is about honor. You have none. And I will make it my personal mission to ensure that the entire world knows it. With those final devastating words, Mr. Tanaka turned his back on Harrison Blackwood. It was a gesture of ultimate dismissal, more profound and insulting than any shout could have been. He walked over to where Abby and her mother stood huddled together. He gave them both a deep formal bow, a gesture of profound respect that was utterly alien in the cold, transactional world of the Blackwood penthouse. Miss Riley, he said to Abby, his voice now warm and paternal, and Mrs. Riley, I would be honored if you would allow me to see you home. It is not right for you to remain in this place any longer. Helen, who had been standing as if in a trance, finally found her voice, though it was little more than a whisper. Sir, you don't have to. We can just take the bus. We're fine. The ingrained habit of not wanting to be a bother, of trying to remain invisible was hard to break, even now. Nonsense, Mr. Tanaka said gently but firmly. My driver is downstairs. It would be my privilege. He looked at Abby. Your grandfather was a man of great honor. His family is my family. The scene that unfolded behind them was one of utter collapse. Harrison Blackwood, stripped of his power and prestige in a matter of minutes, seemed to shrink before their eyes. The blustering, arrogant titan of industry was gone, replaced by a desperate, pleading man. Kenji, wait, he cried out, his voice. We can fix this. It was a misunderstanding, a clerical error. We can renegotiate. Name your price. Mr. Tanaka didn't even turn around. He simply gestured for his two aides to handle it. One of the aides turned to Harrison, his expression like granite. He spoke in crisp, perfect English. Mr. Blackwood, any further communication will be through our lawyers. I suggest you retain counsel. You will be hearing from us regarding the matter of attempted fraud. He then turned to the other guests, Harrison's so-called friends and associates, who were now trying to discreetly edge their way towards the elevator. And for all of you who witnessed this, remember what you saw here today. The name Blackwood is now poison. The associates froze, their faces pale. They looked at Harrison, not with sympathy, but with the cold calculation of rats deserting a sinking ship. The $500 million deal wasn't just dead. It was about to become a career-ending scandal, and no one wanted to be caught in the blast radius. Eleanor Blackwood, who had built her entire identity on her husband's wealth and power, finally seemed to grasp the enormity of their ruin. The mask of icy superiority shattered, revealing a raw, ugly panic beneath. Harrison, you fool, she shrieked, her voice a discordant symphony of rage and fear. "You utter complete fool. How could you be so stupid, so arrogant? You've ruined us. I told you not to get greedy." She turned on Preston, who was standing slack-jawed, his face the color of spoiled milk. "And you with your stupid jokes and your arrogance. You couldn't just be quiet for one afternoon, could you? You had to provoke the help. Me?" Preston shot back, his voice cracking. "How is this my fault? Dad's the one who cooked the books. I didn't even know what was in the contract." The once powerful Blackwood family was imploding, tearing itself apart in a flurry of accusations and recriminations right in the middle of their glass-walled palace. They had forgotten anyone else was even in the room. Through it all, Abby stood quietly, holding her mother's hand. She watched the family that had looked down on her with such contempt now reduced to a squabbling, pathetic mess. There was no triumph in her heart, no sense of victory, just a profound, aching sadness. They had so much, yet they had nothing. They were prisoners in their own beautiful cage, and the door had just been slammed shut. Mr. Tanaka gently guided Abby and Helen toward the elevator, shielding them from the ugly spectacle. As they waited for the doors to open, he paused and looked back at the interpreter, Clark, who was slumped in a chair, his head in his hands, weeping softly. "Mr. Tanaka said something in Japanese to his second aide. The aide nodded, walked over to the disgraced interpreter, and placed a business card on the table beside him. "Mr. Tanaka believes that every man deserves a chance to reclaim his honor," the aide said, his voice devoid of emotion. "That does not mean there will not be consequences for your actions. But if you tell the truth and cooperate fully, our company may be able to help you find work again. Far from here." Clark looked up, his face streaked with tears, a flicker of disbelief and hope in his red-rimmed eyes. He picked up the card as if it were a holy relic. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime. As Mr. Tanaka ushered Abby and Helen inside, Abby took one last look back. Harrison was on his knees, begging his former associates not to leave. Eleanor was screaming into her phone, presumably at her own lawyer, and Preston had simply collapsed onto the Italian silk rug, the same one his mother had been so concerned about, staring blankly at the skyline, a lost boy in a ruined kingdom. The doors closed, shutting out the noise and the anger, encasing the three of them in a nascent cocoon of mirrored steel and silence. The descent was as smooth and quiet as the ascent had been. It felt like they were returning from another planet. As they stepped out into the opulent lobby, the doorman rushed to open the doors, his face a mask of professional courtesy. Outside, a sleek black car, long and impossibly shiny, was waiting at the curb. A chauffeur in a neat black suit held the rear door open. It was a world away from the crowded, rattling city bus they had taken to get here. Helen hesitated, looking at the luxurious interior of the car, as if it might burn her to touch it. She had spent her life cleaning up after people who lived like this, always on the outside looking in. To actually sit on the plush leather seats felt like a transgression. Abby, sensing her mother's hesitation, gave her hand a gentle squeeze. "It's okay, Mom," she whispered. Mr. Tanaka smiled kindly. "Please," he said. Helen took a deep breath and slid into the car. Abby followed, sinking into the soft leather. The seat felt like a cloud. The inside of the car was silent, smelling of new leather and a faint, clean scent she couldn't identify. The city noise was completely gone, replaced by a gentle, humming quiet. Mr. Tanaka got in after them, sitting opposite them on a rear-facing seat. The chauffeur closed the door with a solid, satisfying thud, and the car pulled away from the curb, gliding into the stream of Chicago traffic with effortless grace. For a long time, no one spoke. Helen stared out the window, her expression unreadable, as the towering skyscrapers of downtown gave way to the more familiar, grittier neighborhoods of their side of town. Abby held her grandfather's book of folktales in her lap. It felt heavier now, as if the stories inside had come to life. Finally, Mr. Tanaka broke the silence. He didn't speak of the Blackwoods, of the contract, or of the colossal financial storm that was about to break over the city. He spoke of her grandfather. "Your grandfather, Walter," he said, his voice soft and reflective. "Did he ever receive the letters?" Abby looked up, confused. "What letters?" "My grandfather, Sadaru, Tried to find him after the war. Mr. Tanaka explained it was difficult. All he had was a name and a division. He wrote letters, sent them to the U.S. Army, to veterans associations. He never received a reply. He worried that your grandfather had not survived the rest of the war. He looked down at his hands. It was his life's greatest regret that he was never able to thank him properly. He made it home, Abby said quietly. He was injured, but he made it home. He never talked about receiving any letters. We moved a few times when I was little. Maybe they got lost. It was a simple explanation for a lifetime of silence, a lifetime of unknowing. A few lost letters that had prevented two old soldiers from reconnecting, from closing a circle of kindness that had begun in the hell of a battlefield half a world away. He would have been happy to know your grandfather was okay. Abby added, my grandpa never thought he did anything special. He just said, you help people when they need helping. It doesn't matter what uniform they're wearing. Mr. Tanaka smiled, a genuine, warm smile that lit up his entire face. That sounds exactly like the man my grandfather described. He leaned forward, his expression turning serious, but not unkind. Mrs. Riley, he said, addressing Helen directly. You have a remarkable daughter. She is wise and brave beyond her years. It is clear you have raised her well. Helen finally turned from the window, her eyes glistening with tears. Thank you, sir. She's all I have. I understand that you have been facing some difficulties, Mr. Tanaka said, his tone delicate and respectful. Harrison Blackwood made it clear that he intended to ruin your prospects. I will not allow that to happen. You don't have to worry about us, Helen said quickly. I'll find another job. We'll be all right. We always are. It was the reflexive pride of someone who had never taken a hand out in her life. I am not worried. Mr. Tanaka corrected her gently. I am offering. As I said, your family is my family. The Tanaka Corporation has a large foundation dedicated to education. It is our way of investing in the future. We provide scholarships to promising students. I believe Abigail would be a most deserving recipient. He looked at Abby. Have you thought about where you might like to go to college someday? Abby was stunned into silence. College wasn't a dream she allowed herself to have. It was a distant, impossible mountain, and their family was stuck in a valley of debt. Her plan was simple: finish high school, get a job, and help her mom. That was it. That was the horizon. A full scholarship, Mr. Tanaka continued as if sensing her disbelief. To any university of her choosing anywhere in the world. All expenses paid and a living stipend for your family to ensure that she has the support she needs to focus on her studies without financial worry. Helen gasped, her hand flying to her chest. Sir, I can't accept that. It's too much. It is not a gift, Mrs. Riley. Mr. Tanaka said, his voice firm but kind. It is the repayment of a debt of honor that has been owed for over 70 years. My family would be dishonored if you refused. He bowed his head slightly. Please allow us to do this. For Walter and for Satoru. The car slowed as it turned onto their street. It looked completely out of place, a sleek black shark in a sea of dented minnows. Their apartment building with its crumbling brick facade and rusted fire escapes seemed to shrink in the car's magnificent presence. Tears were now streaming freely down Helen's face. They weren't tears of sadness or fear, but of overwhelming, unbelievable relief. It was the release of years of pent-up worry, of sleepless nights spent staring at the ceiling, wondering how they would ever get by. It was the sound of a mountain of debt, a lifetime of struggle turning into dust and blowing away on the wind. She looked at her daughter, her fierce, brilliant, brave little girl, who had just single-handedly taken down a billionaire, and in doing so, had rewritten their entire future. She pulled Abby into a fierce hug, burying her face in her daughter's blonde hair. Thank you, she sobbed, the words muffled. It wasn't just directed at Mr. Tanaka. It was a thank you to the universe, to a long-gone grandfather, to the strange and beautiful twists of fate that had brought them to this incredible moment. The car stopped in front of their building. The chauffeur was already outside, holding the door open. As they got out, the familiar sights and sounds of their neighborhood seemed different, brighter. The setting sun cast a golden glow on the worn-out streets. Neighbors peeked out of their windows, their eyes wide at the sight of the limousine and the impeccably dressed Japanese gentleman. Before getting back into his car, Mr. Tanaka handed Helen another business card. "This is my personal assistant's number. She will call you tomorrow to make all the arrangements. You will not have to work for people like the Blackwoods ever again. Your only job now is to support this brilliant young woman." He then knelt so that he was eye level with Abby. "Your grandfather's spirit is strong in you, Abigail Riley," he said, his voice filled with a deep and abiding respect. "You have his courage and you have his honor. Never lose that. The world has enough clever people. What it needs are more honorable ones." He bowed to her one last time, then got into his car. The vehicle pulled away as silently as it had arrived, disappearing around the corner, leaving Abby and her mother standing on the sidewalk in the fading light. Their lives irrevocably and beautifully changed forever. Abby looked up at their small apartment window on the third floor. It was just a simple window in a simple building on a simple street. But for the first time in a very long time, it truly felt like home. Not just a place to sleep, but a place of safety, a place of hope, a place where a brand new future was about to begin. The piece of paper that could have ruined them had instead set them free. The days that followed were a blur for Helen and Abby, a surreal dream from which they were afraid they might wake. The first phone call came the very next morning as promised. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, and incredibly kind. It was Mr. Tanaka's personal assistant, a woman named Emmy, who spoke with a gentle efficiency that immediately put Helen at ease. There were no complicated forms to fill out, no bureaucratic hoops to jump through. Emmy explained everything simply. The Tanaka Foundation had already been instructed. A trust was being established in Abby's name for her education. A separate account was being opened for Helen with enough funds deposited to clear their debts and cover their living expenses for the foreseeable future. Mr. Tanaka's instructions were very clear. "Mrs. Riley," Emmy said over the phone, "your only job is to be a mother. Find a new place to live, a safe and comfortable home. Get a new phone number. We will handle the rest." When Helen hung up the phone, she sat in stunned silence for a full minute before bursting into tears. But these were not the tears of despair she was so used to. They were tears of disbelief, of gratitude so immense it was painful. She hugged Abby tightly. The small, cramped kitchen of their old apartment filled with the sound of a new beginning. Meanwhile, a very different story was playing out across the city. The Blackwood Empire, which had seemed so invincible, so solid, was crumbling like a sand castle in a hurricane. Mr. Tanaka was a man of his word. He did not go to the press with sensational stories. He didn't need to. He was a titan in the world of international finance, a man whose reputation for integrity was legendary. When he quietly withdrew from the $500 million deal, citing a catastrophic breach of ethical conduct, the financial world listened. Rumors began to swirl. Quiet whispers at first, then a roar. Whispers of fraud of a doctored contract. The story was too juicy to stay contained. An ambitious young reporter at the Chicago Financial Times got a tip from one of Harrison's panicked former associates, a man desperate to distance himself from the scandal. The story broke on a Wednesday morning. A front page, exposed detailing the attempted swindle. The article didn't name Abby, referring to her only as a source with an unexpected knowledge of Japanese, but the details were damning. Blackwood Global stock, which had been soaring in anticipation of the deal, didn't just fall. It plummeted off a cliff. It lost 80% of its value in a single day of trading. Harrison's investors, the ones who had laughed at Preston's jokes and admired Eleanor's art, stampeded for the exits. The company was in a death spiral. The social fallout was just as brutal. The Blackwoods were unceremoniously stripped of their philanthropic board positions. Invitations to galas and charity balls mysteriously dried up. The friends who had once clamored for a weekend on their yacht now crossed the street to avoid them. They were Paris. Their name is synonym for disgrace. They had built their world on a foundation of money and power. And when that was gone, they discovered there was nothing left underneath. Abby and Helen saw none of this firsthand. They were too busy building a new life. Within a week, they had found a new apartment. It wasn't a penthouse in the sky, but to them, it was a palace. It was a modest two-bedroom unit in a clean, quiet building in a safe neighborhood with a small park across the street. For the first time in years, Abby had her own room, a space that wasn't a curtained-off corner of the living room. It had a window that looked out onto an old oak tree, and the afternoon sun streamed in, making dust motes dance in the air. The first thing they bought for the new apartment was a comfortable armchair. It was a deep, soft chair upholstered in a warm blue fabric. They placed it by the window in the living room next to a small bookshelf. It was for her grandfather, Abby said, a place for his memory to rest. The changes were small at first, but they were profound. Helen no longer came home with her shoulders aching and her feet swollen, the smell of other people's cleaning supplies clinging to her clothes. She started cooking again, filling their small kitchen with the smells of baked bread and simmering soup, smells Abby had almost forgotten. The perpetual worry that had been etched around Helen's eyes began to fade, replaced by a soft, peaceful light. She smiled more. She laughed. Abby enrolled in a new school, a public school known for its excellent academic programs. On her first day, she was nervous, clutching the strap of her new, sturdy backpack. But here, no one looked at her shoes. No one judged her by the faded quality of her jeans. They saw a quiet, fiercely intelligent girl who was a prodigy in language arts and had a surprising knack for science. She made friends, tentative at first, then real. Friends who invited her over to play video games and study for tests. For the first time, she felt like a normal kid. Her connection with Mr. Tanaka didn't end with that one car ride. He called once a month, his voice a warm and steady presence on the other end of the line. He never spoke of business. He would ask about her school, about her mother, about what books she was reading. He sent her a collection of classic Japanese literature, beautiful hardbound volumes with delicate rice paper pages. In turn, Abby would tell him stories about her grandfather, sharing the memories she held so dear, keeping his spirit alive for the man who owed him so much. It was an unlikely friendship forged in honor and spanning generations, a quiet bond that enriched both their lives. One crisp autumn afternoon, about a year after their lives had been turned upside down, Abby asked her mother to drive her to the old military cemetery on the outskirts of the city. They bought a small bouquet of simple white chrysanthemums on the way. They found Walter Riley's grave in a quiet section near a grove of maple trees, their leaves a riot of red and gold. It was a simple government tissue headstone, his name, rank, and the dates of his life carved into the weathered gray stone. Abby knelt and carefully placed the flowers at the base of the headstone. She traced the letters of his name with her finger, the stone cool beneath her touch. She didn't cry. She just felt a profound sense of peace, of connection. "Hi, Grandpa," she whispered to the wind. "A lot has changed. Mom and I are doing really good. We have a nice place now. I have my own room. I think you'd like it." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "The book you gave me, the one with the folk tales, it came in handy," she said with a small, wry smile. "You were right. You said honor is the only thing a person truly owns. I didn't really understand what that meant, but I do now." She thought of the Blackwoods with all their money and all their things, and how quickly it had all turned to ash because they had no honor. And she thought of her grandfather and Satoru Tanaka, two young men on opposite sides of a terrible war, who had chosen humanity over hatred, and whose simple act of decency had rippled through time, saving her and her mother 7 decades later. "That man you helped, Grandpa," she continued, her voice soft. "His grandson found us. He's a good man. He said he was repaying a debt, but I think he was just doing what you would have done, helping people when they need helping." Helen stood a few feet away, giving her daughter this private moment, her own silent tears tracing paths down her cheeks. She watched as Abby, her 2-year-old girl, who was now 13, and stood a little taller with a new confidence in her eyes, finished her conversation. Abby stood up, brushing the grass from her knees. She took her mother's hand, and together they walked away from the grave, the autumn sun casting long shadows behind them. She had come to the cemetery to say thank you. But she realized as they left that her grandfather's lessons weren't just in the past. They were in her heart, a moral compass that had guided her through the darkest of rooms and into the light. It was a legacy not of money or of land, but of character, and it was the most valuable inheritance of all. That evening, back in their quiet, comfortable apartment, Abby sat in the blue armchair by the window. One of the books Mr. Tanaka had sent her open in her lap. The story was about an ancient samurai who, faced with a corrupt and powerful lord, chose to sacrifice everything for the sake of his honor. Outside, the city lights of Chicago began to twinkle against the deep velvet of the night sky. For so many people, that city was a place of frantic ambition, a relentless climb for power and wealth. But for Abby, looking out from the warmth and safety of her new home, it looked different now. It was a place where a quiet truth spoken in a language of honor could be more powerful than all the money in the world. And she, the maid's daughter, was ready for whatever came next. She wasn't a victim of her circumstances anymore. She was the guardian of her grandfather's legacy. And her story was just beginning. Thank you for following this story. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and share your thoughts below. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. Stay tuned for more immersive stories.